Hello, Michael here with another Nuke tutorial. Today we're going to be having a look at how to create dust motes and create some extra atmosphere in your scenes like you're seeing on screen right now, as I've done in some previous renders. We're going to be doing it on a much more basic scene to get you started. I'd recommend testing it out the workflow first on something more simple and then working on to something more complex like you've seen here. So what I've got is a scene here with a couple of pieces of geometry and a light. You can use any renderer for this method, the stipulation being that you will need the ability to either use cryptomats or mat IDs for your output passes. I'm going to use RenderMan in this example just so I can use cryptomats because it's a little bit quicker, but you're free to use any other renderer that supports mat IDs or cryptomats. Same thing we'll be doing will work with those. The reason for the cryptomats is that this area here where the window is, we want something to be able to select in Nuke to project some light through. If you don't understand what that means right now, don't worry, we will get to that in a minute. But for now, just know that you will want to be able to select this area where the light is coming through. Now, you can do that a couple of different ways. If you have nothing in there and you are using a cryptomat, then you could just invert your selection in Nuke. And again, just wait till we get to there. If you don't understand, you will understand once we do. Otherwise, you could just create a polygon plane. So when you render it, that will be a separate piece of geometry to your room. And you'll just need to make sure that that is not renderable. So you will need to go down to render stats, or depending on your renderer how you do this, but you want to turn off primary and secondary visibility. Basically turn off all this. It's just going to be some geometry in the scene. If you're using Redshift, you can just do it in here and go through and turn those off. But also if you're using RenderMan, you use cryptomats and we can just invert a selection, so it's going to be easy. So I'm not going to do that just for the sake of ease. So first thing we're going to do is, if you have a more complex scene, just add in some stand-in geometry, just something to block out where everything is going to be. This geometry is not actually going to be rendered for Nuke, but we are going to export it. So it's just going to give us an idea in Nuke where everything should be. So we need to combine it. So combine that so it's one mesh. And then we're going to export it as an FBX. So select that, export, selection, and then just go to where you're exporting it to. And we'll call this geos. And obviously make sure that you've got FBX selected. That's fine. Now your light, if you're using RenderMan, your light won't export out like you would expect it to. So you will have to, if you want to use your light to project the light through the window and simulate that, you can put in a stand-in just as like a Maya light, just like a directional light will do the trick. And you'll just need to put in the same position as your existing light. Just obviously look at the transforms for each and line them up, and then you can just export that as an FBX as well. I'm not going to do that. I do have one exported and I'll show you how to do that, but the way I'm going to do this, we're not really going to bother too much with the light so much. The camera is the last thing that you need to do. Now the camera in this shot, it's got a little pan, as you can see. So we will export this as an Alembic cache. So go to cache with the camera selected, and go to export selection to Alembic, and then you can just call this camera 1, call it the same thing as the camera that you're using in the Maya scene, in case you're handing this off to a compositor so they know what the heck is going on. So we've got our geos out, we've got our camera out, and if you did select, want to do your extra light, you could do the light as well. I'm just going to be illuminating this a little bit more simply though in the scene. We can now go to our render settings. And if you're using RenderMan and you want to enable cryptomats, it's under features. You just right click here and you add cryptomat, create cryptomat. And for our AOVs, depending on what renderer you're using, you'll want to add a Z pass in. And I've just put that in the beauty pass so we can break that out once we're in Nuke. If you're using Redshift or Arnold or anything like that, it's just the same thing, whether or not you have access to cryptomats. I'm not sure what Arnold does. I'm pretty sure it does. I haven't used it in quite a while. I know Redshift's most current version does have cryptomats as well. Okay, so the shot, if we have a look through the camera, looks like this. So we just have some light coming through the window there, hitting the cube and casting a shadow, and creating a little sort of spotlight from the window frame there. Now I've already rendered this out, so you don't have to sit through me rendering it out, so we'll skip that part. But for RenderMan, it is just a matter of going to make sure that your render settings are set to animation, and that you have the correct camera selected, and you've done all your AOVs as I did previously, and then you go to RenderMan and batch render. I have used denoising for this, and I've used a very terribly low sample rate of 32, but it actually doesn't look too bad. So let's jump into Nuke and have a look at our outputs now. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do here in Nuke is import our render passes. So what we've got here is the beauty pass, the denoise beauty pass, the raw beauty pass. I think we're just going to use the denoise version, so we'll drop that out. And the cryptomat, which we can't see anything on because we need a cryptomat node. Now I've got a separate tutorial on cryptomat, so if you want to find out more about this, then you can check that out for RenderMan specifically. So you can see that the room here is all purple, and then the area here, which is black, is the outside. So we want to make that area selectable. So what we're going to do is color picker add, hold control and select the room, and then we're just going to create an invert color node, and now we've got the inversion there, so we can use that. So we'll start building up a little bit of the 2D scene first. So what we'll do is create a merge. Actually, we want the B pipe there, and we want the A pipe to be connected to a constant. Now this constant can be any color that you want. If you wanted the light to be sort of, instead of white, you could make it purple or whatever you like. It doesn't really matter, but we're just going to make it white for the sake of this tutorial. And then we're going to create a volume ray. And actually we want to set that to copy. Oh, sorry, and the B pipe is actually not being used. We're using the mask, sorry, not the B pipe. Alright, so now you can see the volume ray here is coming through the window, so it's very clever. And what we want to do is set the quality to very high, so we get rid of those banding from the gradient there. If your computer is not very powerful, you might want to set it lower while you're working on it, and then set it to very high once you start rendering. We'll go and do some more settings to this later, but for now that's probably going to be fine. So you can see the very basics of what we're doing here. Have I actually set that to white? There we go. You can see the very basics of what we're doing here with that geometry, but we need to actually bring the 3D scene in so we can create our dust modes. Just going to create a scene 3D node, and we'll set up the particles first. So there's going to be particle emitter, and we're also going to use a particle turbulence, and then that's going to go into the scene. Don't really need to be looking at that too much right now, so we'll get it out of the way. And then we're going to do a regeo, and as you can probably guess, that's going to be our geometry. So we're going to open the geometry up, which is geo. Open that up there. So now when we look at the scene, you can see the geometry right there. Now the last thing we need to bring in is the camera, which we will need to create a scanline render node for, and a camera 3D. Connect the camera output from the scanline into the camera, and then in the camera we're going to go to file, and we're going to read it from file, and we'll open our camera 1. Yes, we want to do that. So now we can see our camera, and it should pan in the scene. Now, why is it important to use the camera? Because we want the camera to move amongst the dust. Now we need to create the dust. So the dust is pretty simple to do. It took me a little bit to figure out how best to do this, and this is one way of doing it. There are a couple of other ways you could do it, but this is pretty effective, and I've seen shows do this effect, and this is how I've worked out how to do it. I don't know if it's the same way, but it looks pretty close. So what we'll do is we're going to create a cube geometry, and we're going to connect the emit to the cube, and the cube, we're going to scale. I shouldn't really be doing this in the viewport because I'm terrible at using the viewport in Nuke, but we're sort of getting in there. Okay, cool. Now we don't want it to be crazy big, but we do want it to be on top of the camera and partway in the room. And we're just going to make it so we don't have to look at this cube. We'll just change it to wireframe. So now we can see what's going on inside. So basically, we don't want really the cube to be going past anything that's got a backside to the camera. So the camera's here. We don't want particles rendering behind this cube because it's going to be layered on top of it will end up looking like it's on top of things that are actually deeper in perspective. If that doesn't quite make sense, it will make sense in a little bit, hopefully. But we're just going to make it so it looks like there is dust in the scene, and it will work if we just do this. If we just have it sort of where the camera is, so the camera is amongst the dust. The dust is continuing along the entire length of the room, and it is in front of the cube or geometry that we have. So, and in the examples that I showed at the beginning, this is the method that I've used to do it. So I haven't actually put the dust throughout the entire view space. Now you could also mask the dust render off using cryptomats and things like this, but I'm just keeping it very simple for this one. So that's the dust. So now if we turn off that, so we don't need to really see the cube anymore, we can see that we've got dust here, not really doing anything that dust would actually do. So the first thing we need to do is go into our particle emitter, and we need to change the emit from. We need to change this to bounding box. So it's going to use the cube as a bounding box. So it's going to emit particles from somewhere within the cube, not attached to the surface normals or anything like that of the cube. So now it should look like it's just stuck within the sort of cube, or it's being emitted from within the cube. And obviously it looks crazy at the moment, so we're going to cheat here. I'm just going to use the settings I've used previously. Start at point is going to be -300. That's -300 frames. It's going to calculate the dust to be emitted from. So it's going to sort of calculate before the first frame where the dust should be. So by the time you get to the first frame, there should already be a lot of dust on screen. We're going to change the max lifetime to 400 and the range to 400. The velocity, we're going to make it very slow because it's dust, and your use cases will vary depending on your scene sizes, so you will have to interpret this and extrapolate it to what you are doing yourself. But it will basically work if you kind of try this, see if it goes. If it doesn't, then you'll need to make some adjustments. Alright, so now we should have some dust sort of floating around a bit simply. Yeah, so you can see that's going nice and slow now. Unfortunately, it's all going in the same direction, essentially, from what I can tell, so we need to adjust our turbulence. So again, I'm going to use my existing settings. So this is just a very low amount of turbulence. The scale, from memory, is going to make it, the larger it is, the slower it moves. Yeah. So now we've got some nice slow moving and random dust. So some of it's going up and down and left and right. And as you can see, from where the camera would be, which is roughly here, you'll get, just make that bigger so we can actually see what's going on. You get some nice dust sort of moving throughout the scene in front of you. Alright, so dust isn't really square, so we need to make some dust that is not square. So we're going to do that in Photoshop very quickly. So what we're going to do is create a 10 pixel by 10 pixel file. We want a transparent background, so delete your background layer. And I'm just going to make the background black so you can see what I'm doing. I'm just going to use the pencil so I can actually get a 1 pixel square. And I'm going to set it to white. And then you just want to draw some dust in. You could use the paintbrush if you want, and then that way you can get some fall off. and you just want to create some sort of random dusty shapes. Dust isn't going to always be just a circle. It's not always going to be a square, obviously, either. It's not always going to be a line. I made 10 different ones already, and I'll show you those in a moment, but I just want to get the point across that you can create them here in Photoshop simply, create some little highlighted points as well. You're not really going to see the dust. You are going to be able to detect it sort of subconsciously more than anything, but no one is really going to be looking at what it looks like. So this is a very simple method. If you want to make it more detailed and realistic, you could actually use three-dimensional geometry to do the dust. It's going to cost you on render, it's going to cost you on CPU. The disadvantage of doing this way is that you can't make the dust obviously rotate in three-dimensional space because it's just a 2D plane. So we'll get rid of the background, and now you can't see the dust, but it's there. It's just because it's got a transparent backdrop, and we're going to save this as a TIFF like so. You don't need layers. I can't remember if I kept layers on or not. I'll keep it on just for the sake of it and just save it as whatever you want, and then save it out like so. I'm not going to do that because I've already got 10 made already. So let's import those. Alright, so here is 10 dust motes, very messily placed in the screen. Alright, so what we're going to do is just connect all of these up to our particle emitter. And this is a terrible nightmare that I created here, but I'm sorry about that, but we're just going to roll with it. I'm just doing this sort of quickly. So now you can see the dust is all sorts of different shapes. It is also two-dimensional, so no matter where I put the camera, it doesn't have any depth or perspective, but it will do the trick. So now when we run this, you know, you can see that everything looks a little bit more interesting, and it just creates that subtle bit of variation that will make your scene look a little bit better. And I'm all about the subtlety. Subtlety is what makes images look interesting. So at the moment, if we rendered this out, you wouldn't be able to see anything because we don't have a light, so we need to create a light for the scene and connect that up. Now, the light that we had was out here. Though what I've noticed about the lights in Nuke is that they're not very powerful and they don't tend to illuminate the scene very well when I've been trying to do this, not all in all examples. Also, the dust isn't actually where we're pretending it is. It's not actually here in front of the window, it's to this point here. So it's not going to illuminate it very realistically if you sort of import your light from Maya, but I did want to show that because I thought it was important if you wanted to alter this method to work in a different way, in a way that you might prefer. So with our light in the scene, we're just going to change the intensity to be very high, and we're going to make it so our geometry now does not render because we don't want to see it in the render. We've already got our 2D image rendered out, which I believe I showed you already. Here I have this. Just so you know, that's what the render is. So we're going to create a reformat transform, and the output from the scan line is going to go into the reformat. So now when you look at the reformat and run that, you're going to be able to see this movement of the camera passing through the dust. Now, something I noticed after I did this render is that my camera is moving way too quick. So yeah, so you don't actually see as much depth as I'd like, but you can see how I've made this work better in my examples at the start of the tutorial, which I'll show you again at the end. Something you might be considering is that the dust is going to be everywhere and it's going to be completely illuminated within the scene, which is not very realistic because we should only really be able to see the illumination where the light is and not so much in the dark areas. So we're going to fix that. First we're going to sort of finish off our 2D comp. Alright, so we've got our volume raise here. We're going to create a merge node. This is going to be B into that, and we're going to make it a multiply, and we're going to create a noise and a grade, and then that's going to be our A pipe. So you can see what's happened there is that it's multiplying the noise by the volume raise. So our noise, we're just going to make some adjustments to. I'm going to key in some animation. I'm going to change the size of it as well because it's probably a little bit too small. XY size. I want this to be pretty subtle. I'm just going to grade it so it's a little bit brighter at the moment. And then the noise. Actually, let's just fix this. Oh, okay, this is not. So the problem I had there was for some reason my Cryptomat was keyed on frame 2, sorry. So the first frame had no key on it. So when the volume ray was emitting, on the first frame it was emitting everywhere, and then the second frame it found the key for the Cryptomat. So if you have the same problem, make sure you undo what I just did. So yeah, my Cryptomat, just make sure you're at set to frame 1 when you do your color picker for that. So now that multiply should work nicely, and our noise at frame 1 we're going to set to 0, and at frame 48 we're going to set to 0.25. So now we just get a very subtle, a bit of sort of fog happening there. You don't have to do this, but it kind of looks cool. Okay, so let's continue to comp in the rest of our 2D scene. So we need to create another merge node. And I just realized that I'm mixing up my A's and my B's really bad here, but you'll have to forgive me. This is not how I would normally do it, but just to roll with it. You can rearrange everything so it looks nice and tidy instead of this mess that I've done, but it will work, so just roll with me. So we've got our merge. We're just going to create it as a merge over, and we are going to shuffle out our depth from our beauty node. So that looks like that. To make it easier to see, we can use a grade, and we can just like change it to 250 on the white point, so you can actually see what's going on. It will actually read the grade regardless of where you set the white point. It'll just have you'll change what you do when you work with this further down, but this is fine. And then we'll create another merge, and confusingly we will again soft these around. I'm really sorry about this. I didn't actually plan this out very well, but it will work like I said. So we'll change this to the screen. So now we've got this screen working here. The screen is being multiplied by the ZDepth, so the further away in space it gets, the more opaque the white will be. So we just want to change it so it's very subtle. So that's what it looks like when it's off. We just want to make a little adjustment there, so things in the background sort of become a little bit more, look a little bit more like there's a lot of volume there. So now when you run that animation, you can see the light's doing what it's doing, and the ZDepth is working as well. What you will also notice is that the light currently does not really match up very well with the projected spot and the shadows. So we need to adjust our volume raise position so they do work correctly. So we're going to basically eyeball this, and this works just fine. And allows you to decide your composition for the silhouette of the light rays. So you don't necessarily have to have it in the realistic position, which might have been somewhere like that, for example. You can actually cut your light in a bit higher if you want, which these sorts of options will help you compositionally for your final scene. So we've got that. We just basically want this line here to meet that point there of the highlight, and then this can be basically wherever you want it, just considering what else is going on in your scene. Then we're just going to do a roto on our merge here. So roto draw, that's going to be on our mask. Select the root in the roto node options, and we're just going to create Bezier, which starts there, goes down there, and this can be just a triangle like that. And so basically what we're doing is we're masking off the area where we don't want this to fall. we don't want the light to fall outside of the highlight, so we're just going to invert that. So now you can see that's working nicely. We will need a key our roto, because obviously it's not going to be the same once it gets to there. So on the frame 48, just going to move that there and move that there, and just hit Q. So now when we run through the animation, I realize that I actually haven't keyed in the volume ray position either, so just going to make that so it's lining up like so. And I need to make sure that I actually set a key and set a key for the start as well. Sorry about that. Alright, so now that should animate correctly. As you can see. So my camera moves linearly. It doesn't have any curves on the animation. So this is very easy to key out. If your camera has got some acceleration on it, you will need to adjust in your curve editor to compensate for that, because around the middle it might need to be, you know, at a different point to where it would be at the end for this one. The other thing you'll notice is that there is no cast shadow in the volume here, which you should be seeing, so we're just going to add that in as well. So back to our roto node and to our root, and we're just going to create, make sure we're at frame 1. Actually, we're going to do this in reverse because it's going to be easy to see here. So on frame 48, we're going to create, we want this to be the bottom of the box. So this top line should be lined up roughly with the volume rays, like so. So it's creating that sort of effect. Now obviously this is not incredibly scientific, I'm just eyeballing it. And like I sort of said earlier, this method is a lot of eyeballing, but it is effective, and it is just meant to be subtle, a subtle effect to improve the visual quality of your scene. I will adjust this in a little bit just to get the values and the opacity right. So now we'll go to frame 1, and I'm just turning the overlay on and off with Q, by the way. And we'll just realign that. Okay, so now you can go in and do your edges as you like. You can make, you know, that sort of effect, so you get a bit more blur there. And you could also do this overall with your feathering. So I might just add, I don't really want too much feather actually. That using the handles for the feather has actually done a pretty good job. So we're going to leave that as such, but we are going to change the opacity. So, and you could do the opacity with even like a, you could fill the opacity in with like a gradient or something like that, but like I said, we're going to keep this simple. So we want it to be slightly darker because it's casting a shadow in the atmosphere, but we also have some atmosphere being illuminated between the camera and the shadow area. So it shouldn't be 100% like this, and it shouldn't be 100% like this. So somewhere around that will do. And I probably don't have those angles lined up perfectly, but that's going to be okay. So now when we run through the animation, it is just a very subtle effect, but it does make a big difference. So even doing this without the dust motes is still pretty good, but if we add the dust motes in, it will look even better. So let's do that now. So here's our dust motes, so you remember. And I'm going to create a grade, which we will use possibly later on. And then we want a merge, multiply. B is going to be our dust motes, A is going to be our volume rays. So basically what's going to happen is our volume rays are going to multiply our dust motes, so you only get the area that is being in the volume rays, in the dust motes that are in the volume rays that are going to be multiplied. And then we want to add those in with a merge node down here. and connect it up to our merge over here. Just square that out a bit. So now you can see the dust motes are only being impacted, or only really visible where the light is. So, and you can actually see some of these dust motes that are closer to the camera, because they're not illuminated by the by this light, because the light's too far away or it's not intense enough. They're a little bit darker, and you can choose to keep that or not keep that. It's up to you. And obviously the scale there is improving the depth, obviously, on those. Now you may decide that you want more dust, that you want it more subtle, that you want to blend it less or more. But you can see that this is basically the setup that I used. The only other thing that you might want to go through and do is do some more masking here and here, like we did for this, because some of that dust is falling outside or into areas where it shouldn't be as illuminated, because, you know, this is multiplied through here. But I'll allow you to do that if you so choose. So that is the basic setup. And what we'll do now is we'll have a look at the shot that I showed at the beginning, or one of the shots. Okay, so here is my dusty 70s-ish looking room. And you can see I've got some light dust motes in amongst everything, right to the edge of the light that's spilling in through the window there. And you can see that I've made this very, very subtle. There is quite a lot of them, and I've also got them affected by the ZD focus, which is something else you can do. So having a look at what I've done here in the comp, you can see my 3D scene, which is also semi-messy. One of the differences that I made here to my grade, for example, to my ZDepth, for example, is that I multiplied in a yellow overlay, and that is just lighting the scene slightly different. I've given everything slight yellow tint, and then obviously with the ZD focus there. I've also got a vignette, and I've also got chromatic aberration there as well. Otherwise, it's all set up very similarly. I did it slightly different in this one because I didn't use a cryptomat. I actually improved this method after doing this myself. So hopefully your results will be slightly more simple to do than mine. But what I did still worked basically the same way. So that's essentially all there was to it. And I would run this animation in Nuke, but it will chug, so I'll just run it in the video anyway over the top. But as you can see, it's only a 2-second shot, but the dust is very subtle. It's moving slightly, it's fairly dense, and it's only really being illuminated in where the light is spilling through the window. I think I actually did a bit more masking in this one, and you can do that like I said previously, and that might improve your overall results. But that's really all there is to it, and you can see it in the other shots as well, that it does help give the shot a bit more feel to it. And obviously the scene is meant to look old, but it's sort of homey, afternoon light, sort of coming home, being able to see the atmosphere in the room. It's sort of like you're walking in on something that's been there for a long time, and I wanted all those feelings and emotions tied to this shot. So having this little bit of extra atmosphere just sort of plants that in the viewer's mind. It's subtle. It's meant to be subconscious to them. They're not meant to really notice it, but it just adds up overall. It's just always little incremental things that add up overall to make the shot pop a little bit more. So yeah, that is the tutorial. This was a very long one for me, but I hope you were able to follow along with it. If you have any questions, chuck them in the comments below. If you liked the tutorial and you thought it was useful, make sure you click the like button. And if you want to see more like this, make sure you subscribe, as I do tutorials on most weeks for things like Nuke and other 3D software. That's if you want to check out more of my work, check out my Instagram or ArtStation linked in the description. That is all for now though. Thank you very much for watching, and happy rendering.